Once upon a time, there was a young man named Ananda who was a disciple of the Buddha. Ananda was a kind and gentle soul, but he had one weakness: he was quick to anger. One day, Ananda was walking through the forest with the Buddha when they came across a group of men who were arguing. The men were shouting and cursing at each other, and Ananda could feel his anger rising. "Don't let them get to you," the Buddha said calmly. "Just keep walking." But Ananda couldn't help himself. He turned to the men and yelled, "What are you all arguing about? Why don't you just calm down and talk to each other?" The men stopped arguing and looked at Ananda in surprise. "Who are you?" one of the men asked. "I am Ananda, a disciple of the Buddha," Ananda replied. "Well, Ananda," the man said, "we're arguing about who is the wisest man in the world." Ananda smiled. "If you want to know who is the wisest man in the world," he said, "then you must ask the Buddha." The men were intrigued. They had heard of the Buddha's wisdom, so they agreed to go with Ananda to see him. When they arrived at the Buddha's monastery, Ananda introduced the men to the Buddha. "We would like to know who is the wisest man in the world," one of the men said. The Buddha smiled. "The wisest man in the world is the one who is the most patient," he said. The men were confused. "What do you mean?" one of them asked. "The wisest man in the world is the one who can control his anger," the Buddha replied. "When we are angry, we lose our ability to think clearly. We say and do things that we later regret." The men thought about what the Buddha said. They realized that he was right. The wisest man in the world is the one who can control his anger. The men thanked the Buddha for his wisdom and left the monastery. Ananda was still feeling a little angry, but he remembered what the Buddha had said. He took a deep breath and let go of his anger. "Thank you, Buddha," Ananda said. "You have taught me a valuable lesson." The Buddha smiled. "You are welcome, Ananda," he said. "Now, go and be the wisest man you can be." Ananda left the monastery and went on his way. He remembered the Buddha's lesson and he never let his anger get the best of him again. Humorous part asterisk. One day, Ananda was walking through the forest when he came across a group of monkeys. The monkeys were swinging from the trees and chattering loudly. Ananda stopped to watch the monkeys. He was amused by their antics. Suddenly, one of the monkeys threw a coconut at Ananda. The coconut hit Ananda on the head and he fell to the ground. Ananda was furious. He jumped up and yelled at the monkeys. "How dare you throw a coconut at me?" he shouted. "I'm a disciple of the Buddha." The monkeys just looked at Ananda and chattered. Ananda remembered the Buddha's lesson on anger management. He took a deep breath and let go of his anger. "Thank you for teaching me a lesson," Ananda said to the monkeys. "I need to be more patient." Ananda walked away, leaving the monkeys behind. He laughed as he walked. He knew that he would never forget the lesson that he had learned from the monkeys.